The hydraulic press 3 bays over screamed through its cycle at 11,000 pounds of force, same pitch it always ran at, and underneath that noise Olivia Tran was firing me. She hadn't planned it for the catwalk. I could tell from how her voice kept catching against the machinery. But corporate had wanted witnesses, and the floor supervisors were the only ones who'd stay quiet about it afterward. "Effective today," she said, raising her tablet like a shield. 58 years old, 28 of them here. $758,000. That's what I still owed on the loan I'd co-signed for my son's machine shop, the last real debt of my life. Nobody at Holbrook Forge Industries knew that figure. I wasn't planning on telling them now, either. She called it a restructuring of the security function, citing Board Resolution 14C and a legal-approved plan to streamline redundant oversight roles under federal contracts. Underneath that phrasing sat the plain fact she hadn't bothered stating. My badge reader would already log access terminated by the time I reached the stairs, though nobody standing on that catwalk had thought to ask what my clearance actually covered. A welder 2 levels down cut his torch and looked up, then looked away fast. Nobody spoke. The overhead crane groaned into its reset cycle, and I felt the catwalk grating cold and ridged even through my boot soles, the smell of scorched flux drifting up from the welding bay below. I said nothing back to her. I kept both hands flat on the rail and let her finish talking. Whatever sway Olivia now held over security decisions, in 28 years nobody had ever settled it in a room I was part of. That single fact would end up carrying more weight than either of us grasped standing there. I took the long way down instead of the nearest ladder, past the CNC bay, past the stamping line, past the loading dock where the 6 a.m. trucks sat idling. The floor kept right on running below, entirely unbothered by whatever had just occurred one level up. Hot metal and cutting fluid still hung thick in the air, same as any other Tuesday. A faint diesel note drifting in off the dock, and my own boots rang oddly loud against the concrete. The sound of a place turning unfamiliar the instant you stop belonging to it. I didn't drive home. I sat in the cab of my truck in the far lot, engine off, the vinyl seat already warm from sitting in the sun, and pulled a folder from behind the seat. Copies of every certification I'd personally signed, a habit from watching too many companies quietly rewrite what actually happened. Somewhere out past the fence a train horn sounded once, long and flat. I couldn't say yet which page in that folder would matter most. All I had was a hunch, sitting there, that Olivia had never bothered to crack that stack open even once. The hunch undersold the situation badly. This wasn't a stack of routine copies. This was a single, specific authorization, carrying a single specific name, binding for well over a decade. And it had quietly kept working the entire time, indifferent to whether this particular Tuesday ever came. Whatever my name coming off one list was actually going to trigger, nobody standing on that catwalk understood it yet. My phone buzzed once in the cup holder. My son, a photo of the machine shop's new sign going up, nothing that needed a reply yet. I set it face down and let my mind drift somewhere older instead, somewhere that still made sense. 5 autumns back, in 2021, our Huntsville plant took a titanium alloy delivery that should have cleared inspection in 20 minutes. It didn't, not on my watch. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead in that receiving bay, one of them flickering just enough to be annoying, and a forklift idled somewhere behind the pallets, exhaust catching thin and sour in the back of my throat. Everyone around me wanted the trucks rolling before shift change. I held the line instead. 2 decades in, I'd learned that a certification date off by even a single day rarely meant a clerk's slip. It usually meant somebody upstream had gotten sloppy in a way worth tracing. I pulled the batch records up on a tablet propped against a stack of crating, running heat treatment timestamps against the vendor's own shipping log line by line. My fingers ached from the cold coming off the dock doors. Eventually I found it. 1 lot number, off by a single digit, separating what the vendor claimed from what our own intake sheet actually recorded. That single morning in Huntsville is the entire reason Holbrook still carries 3 of its 4 active federal certifications without 1 compliance mark against the company's name. I didn't earn that record behind a desk. I earned it standing on cold concrete before sunrise, holding every stamp up against what the metal itself could prove. I skipped my son's senior recital that same week, staying late to close out the batch file properly instead. He's never once brought it up since. I still think about it more than he probably realizes. Not one line of that history made it into Olivia's announcement on the catwalk. My name still sat on the certification database as primary signatory, technically, filed somewhere in a system her office apparently never thought worth opening before calling my entire function pre-digital overhead. A junior tech told me once, more impressed than mocking, that I treated batch certificates the way some men treat scripture. I let the comparison stand. It had never cost this company a single shipment in 28 years, until, evidently, today. Sitting in the truck now, engine still ticking as it cooled, I finally pulled the inspection seal from my jacket and turned it over slowly in my palm for the first time since the catwalk. Brass worn thin along one edge from decades of pressure, it still carried a faint machine oil smell no amount of cleaning ever fully lifted. I'd stamped my very first shipment with this exact seal the same month my name went on a Holbrook's federal paperwork, in a plant 3 states from this one, under lights that hummed just like these. I slid it back into my jacket, my thoughts already circling toward the fireproof file cabinet waiting at home, the one Olivia had never once bothered asking about. 10:30 showed on the dash, earlier than I'd left this lot on a working Tuesday in 28 years. I logged it the way I logged everything. Flat, exact, without commentary. Then I turned the key. Holbrook's own paperwork was about to get read more carefully than anyone there had ever bothered to read it. 6 months earlier, Olivia Tran's first week included a rollout binder for company-wide biometric badges before her office furniture had even arrived. She found me at the parts counter instead of scheduling a meeting. "You must be Elliot. People keep pointing me toward you whenever I ask about security." 28 years will do that, I told her. Mainly I catch where paperwork and reality stop agreeing with each other. Reality's exactly what needs modernizing. Her tone stayed bright, almost rehearsed. Biometrics, live dashboards, none of this 3-ring binder business. Have you gotten a Section 4 yet? The cosign requirement on federal shipments. Skimmed it, she said. Feels like it was written for a company twice our size and half our speed. It's not about speed. It's about who's legally cleared to certify a shipment leaves this building. The badge system tracks that automatically now. Badges don't hold federal clearance, I said. I do. That's just paperwork now, Elliot. We can't build a modern operation around one signature. It's not one signature. It's the specific person the government actually cleared. I'll have someone look at streamlining the requirement, she said, already turning away, the kind of line that meant nothing would change. One more thing, I added. If a shipment ever leaves without my cosign, federal law treats that as a facility-level violation, not a personal one. That's on the company, not on whoever's badge scanned last. Noted, she said, over her shoulder, already 3 steps gone. 3 weeks after that, a rush order nearly left the yard on a badge log timestamp instead of my cosign. I caught it at the gate, walked it back inside myself, and never mentioned it to her directly. Anthony found out anyway. "You just absorbed that?" he asked, that old Rolodex of his tucked under one arm like always. I corrected it, I said. Absorbing implies I let something slide. She'll try it again. Probably. I'll catch it again. That's not a strategy, Elliot. That's a habit. Habits are cheaper than lawsuits, I said. Have you looped the board in on any of this? On what? That the new COO hasn't finished learning the job. Give her the rest of the year, Anthony. You're a lot more generous with your patience than I'd be in your position. Patience never shows up on an incident report, I pointed out, which is exactly why I trust it more than most things that do. Within 4 weeks, without any announcement, my name had simply vanished off the internal security briefing list, a small omission, invisible unless you're the sort who actually reads a distribution list top to bottom. I keep circling the boundary between protecting a colleague from her own misstep and finally, just letting the misstep land on her directly. No clean answer has ever presented itself. I know only which side of that line I stood on that April, and why. Back when I first noticed things like this happening, this channel barely had an audience at all. Anyone who makes it this deep into a story like mine usually ends up back here for whatever comes after. That's genuinely the whole mechanism. Every word of her modernization pitch sounded sincere to me. Confident people typically are sincere, right up to the moment the exact thing they dismissed turns out to be holding the weight. The very system she'd written off as obsolete was still fully operational, and it wasn't finished with her yet. HR had the exit paperwork ready before I even sat down across from Olivia that afternoon, laid out on the conference table like she'd rehearsed the choreography, the overhead fluorescents humming faintly the way they did in every room in that wing of the building. "Sit, Elliot. Please." She stayed standing herself, arms crossed loosely. "I'll stand too," I said. "Won't take long either way. We're eliminating $15.86 million in what finance calls legacy overhead this fiscal year, security and compliance included. Nothing personal in it. Federal clearance isn't overhead," I said. "It's a legal requirement tied to a specific human being. I happen to be that human being. That's the framework I inherited, sure. I'm building a different one. Does the new framework include a transition plan for who holds my authorizations?" "We're evaluating options," she said. "The badge verification system covers most of the interim need." "It doesn't cover any of it," I said. "But that's not really a question you asked me, so I won't push it." She glanced at the paperwork instead of answering that. "You'll get standard severance. 60 days. I need the credential status language in writing before I leave the building. Exact effective time, not just a date." "Why does the exact time matter?" "Because federal protocol requires me to formally notify 3 agencies the moment my authority ends, and I'd rather not guess," I said. "It's not optional on my end, whatever it looks like on yours." "That seems like unnecessary process for a Tuesday afternoon." "It's one email. Nothing dramatic about it. I've filed the same notice for 2 prior security directors before me. It's routine, not a statement. 2 prior directors filed this exact same thing. Both times someone left the role. It's standard, Olivia. You'd have found it in the onboarding binder if anyone had walked you through it." "Nobody walked me through a lot of things, apparently." "That's not really something I can fix from this side of the table," I said. She studied me a beat too long, like she'd braced for something louder. "You're handling this with more composure than I expected." "Composure's cheap once you've done this a few times," I said. "Done what? Gotten fired?" "Watched a company forget what it actually needed to keep running," I said. She didn't respond to that directly. "Look, none of this reflects on your competence. It's about velocity, and velocity can't get built around any one person's tenure, however impressive. Does the finance team know you're calling federal clearance a tenure issue?" "That's not how I'd phrase it publicly, obviously." "Understood," I said, and let the word carry exactly as much as it was worth. I didn't argue the severance figure, didn't push for a better number, didn't do anything beyond the questions I'd already asked. Before leaving the building, I filed the credential revocation notice myself, from a terminal in the lobby, copying all 3 federal points of contact my name had covered for over a decade. Exactly what protocol required, not one step further and not one step short. The severance letter hit my inbox at 3:58, phrased in language just as clinical as she'd used to my face. Losing the job stung plenty on its own. What nobody in that building understood yet was that a federal shipment clearance review already sat on the calendar for later that week, and the room walking into it would be missing something it hadn't even noticed was gone. My son called around 6 that evening, just to check in. Word travels fast in a town this size. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough, then went out to the garage once the call ended. The federal certification binder was right where it had sat for 15 years, on a shelf I'd built specifically to hold it. Olivia would have seen a plain 3-ring binder, edges softened by handling. I saw the only object in the house still capable of doing something. Subsection 12, near the front, its plastic sleeve gone cloudy from decades of fingers. Facility Clearance Continuity Protocol, drafted after a near-miss 9 years back, that had nearly cost Holbrook its largest defense contract outright. I read it slowly under the workbench light, tracing the language clause by clause, the same patience I'd used on that Huntsville manifest, until every word checked out against itself rather than against what I wanted it to say. Stripped down, the mechanism worked like this. Revoke a named signatory's credentials, and unless a cleared replacement gets designated to the relevant agencies ahead of the upcoming shipment clearance review, every authorization tied to that name suspends on its own. Automatically. No hearing, no appeal window. A fixed condition producing a fixed result, indifferent to whether the people in that building believed it applied to them. My own revocation notice was already filed as of that afternoon. No replacement existed, and none could be produced properly on short notice. The review itself sat 42 hours out, Thursday, late morning. 42 hours, one empty designation, and an entire company's worth of shipments hanging on which side of that gap the clock landed. I reached Anthony a little past 7 that night. He'd served on the committee that drafted subsection 12 back when the board still valued continuity over speed. He heard me out fully before saying a word, the particular patience of a man who's spent decades reading fine print for a living. Still fully enforceable, he confirmed, once I'd given him the number. I helped write the thing. Nobody's touched it since. Would they fight it in court? They'd lose badly. Replacing a cleared signatory takes a background investigation, a facility access review, and formal notice to 3 separate agencies. Realistically, that's a 2-month process minimum, start to finish. Nobody conjures a cleared signatory before Thursday morning, however hard they push. You sound sure of that. I watched this exact scenario nearly sink us once, years before you got here. That kind of lesson sticks. I made 2 copies of the relevant pages, one for the fireproof box, one for an envelope bound for the truck, and pressed the inspection seal into the corner of each, the same motion I'd used on every document that ever mattered across 28 years. It left a faint brass ghost in the paper, easy to miss unless you already knew where to look. One detail Anthony held back on purpose, a procedural wrinkle buried further into the charter that he said would land with more weight Thursday, in person, than it ever could over a phone line tonight. I didn't press him. Some things simply carry more once the room is real and the stakes are visible. I sealed the envelope, marked Thursday's date across the front in block letters, and propped it against the workbench lamp, impossible to miss on any pass through the garage until the review finally happened. Protocols like this one don't need anyone's belief to function. They simply run, on schedule, whether or not the room downstream is ready to receive them. Anthony texted me a photo Wednesday afternoon of the plant's new hallway signage, a poster of Olivia under the words, "Moving at the speed of now," her arms crossed in a stock photo pose nobody at Holbrook had ever actually seen her strike. I stared at it longer than it deserved. He called 20 minutes later. "She replaced the whole clearance verification queue with contractors today," he said. 3 of them. None cleared yet. Background checks are still pending. Who's co-signing their work in the meantime? That's the part you'll love. She authorized the badge system to auto-approve anything under a $1 threshold. Says it removes bottlenecks. That threshold doesn't exist anywhere in federal clearance law. I told her that. She said legal signed off on the general concept. Legal signed off on a concept, not on a specific clearance exemption. Those aren't the same document. I know. I'm just telling you what she told me. There's no $1 threshold on federal clearance, Anthony. It's binary, cleared or not. I know that. Try telling her. I did. Back in April. She's telling the board it's already cutting processing time by 60%. Processing time isn't the metric that matters, I said. Whether the person behind the badge is legally allowed to sign is the metric that matters. Somebody named Lavigne already flagged one of the new contractors co-signing a manifest. Twice, apparently. Got a form letter reply both times. What did it say? Something about workflow modernization. 0 mention of the actual clearance problem. Predictable. You're not even a little worried? I filed everything I'm legally required to file, I said. Worry doesn't change what happens Thursday. It just makes today worse. That's a very controlled way to describe watching a slow-motion accident. 28 years of incident reports will do that to a person, I said. You learn to describe things flatly. Doesn't mean you feel them flatly. Fair enough. I just don't know how you're not climbing the walls. I climbed them Tuesday. I'm done climbing for the week. Does Lavigne know you're aware of all this? He doesn't need to. It's not my job to track anymore, technically. You still sound like it's your job. Old habits outlast titles, I said. That's not the same as it still being my responsibility. Semantics. Protocol, actually. There's a real difference, and Thursday's going to make that difference very obvious to a lot of people. Anthony went quiet for a second, then laughed anyway, a genuine bark of a sound neither of us expected out of a phone call about hallway posters. I stayed out of it entirely. No call to Olivia, no email to anyone still on payroll, no gesture in any direction that might read as trying to fix something. Not detachment, just the plain limit of what a man with revoked credentials is legally allowed to do about a decision he already flagged once and got waved off. That night, scrolling the company newsletter mostly out of boredom, I hit a quote from Olivia describing the new system as practically running on autopilot. Close enough to the exact phrase she'd used standing in my doorway back in April that it stopped me mid-scroll. She clearly believed it both times. That's what stuck with me longer than it should have. How completely a confident person can mean something, all the way through the moment it stops being true underneath them. Nobody at Holbrook had any real sense yet what Thursday was actually about to cost them. By 6:50 Thursday morning, the retirees group chat I still shared with 4 former Holbrook engineers had gone from its usual phishing photos to a screenshot of a federal hold notice. No caption, just the image. I didn't reply. I watched it instead. 7:30. Someone posted that the depot liaison's office had emailed Holbrook's legal team directly. 8:15. A second screenshot. A different shipment, same hold code. By 9, a third. Someone typed, "This is not normal," in all caps, and nobody argued with him. Lavine texted me directly at 9:20. "Can you call? Now if possible." I called. 3 shipments held. Maybe more coming. He said, no preamble. Nobody upstairs can even confirm who's supposed to be signing off right now. What does the compliance registry list? You. Still, nobody's updated it. Then that's your answer. There isn't anybody else on paper. Can I forward that logic to the board? You can forward the registry screenshot. Let them draw their own conclusion. A separate call came in on top of that one. A contracting officer's assistant, a voice I didn't recognize. "Mr. Ingram, I'm told you were listed as signatory of record through yesterday. What time exactly did your credentials get pulled?" 4:52 p.m. yesterday. I filed the notice myself and copied your office. We have it on file. There's no replacement designation attached. That's accurate. Is there any action you're able to take from your end? No. I don't have standing to take any action anymore. That's the entire situation, condensed. Understood. You're the first person from Holbrook today who's answered a direct question with a direct answer. While the plant scrambled through 3 separate emergency calls at once, I sat at my own kitchen table and, from memory, sketched out the exact chain of custody for every certification I'd signed in the past year. Dates, lot numbers, agency contacts, no notes in front of me. Just 28 years of pattern finally laid out on a legal pad in under 10 minutes. Then I made a second pot of coffee, unhurried, same as any other Thursday. Lavine called back at 10:35. Somebody on the board finally asked for the total dollar figure tied to your name. Nobody could produce it fast enough, so it got kicked to me. Did you give it to them? 5.551 billion annualized. I told them straight. That's north of 15 million a day sitting frozen under a revoked signature. He paused. For context, they also asked for Holbrook's total federal book. It's 7.93 billion a year, company-wide. So roughly 70 cents of every dollar this company earns federally is frozen right now, over one unfiled form. How'd that land? Badly. Somebody asked if the number could be wrong. I said it's arithmetic, not opinion. Did they push back? One board member did. Anthony shut it down fast, said if they wanted a second opinion on basic division, they were welcome to get one, on the record, before Thursday's review. That's very Anthony. He's not wrong, though. It really is just division. Doesn't make it feel smaller. No, I said. It doesn't. I didn't volunteer anything to anyone that morning. I didn't mention the binder in my truck, didn't reference Thursday's scheduled review, didn't send one unprompted message. I only spoke when spoken to, and only about facts already true since the day before. By 11, the group chat had gone completely silent, the specific quiet that happens right before everyone realizes the same thing at once. I set the legal pad on the counter, poured the second cup, and looked out at nothing in particular through the kitchen window for a while. Thursday's review started 20 minutes late because the video link to the contracting office kept dropping. A small, mundane technical glitch that somehow made the whole morning feel more real than anything that had happened up to that point. Anthony sat to my left. Lavine sat across the table, a stack of shipment logs squared neatly on the surface before him, untouched so far. Olivia arrived last, laptop already open, already talking before she'd fully sat down. "Before anyone frames this as a crisis," she said, "I want to walk through the corrective steps we've already initiated. Steps taken after the fact don't undo what the protocol already triggered," Anthony said. Subsection 12 is still in force. I sat on the committee that wrote it. That committee met a long time ago, Anthony. Holbrook operates differently now. Operating differently doesn't repeal a federal requirement. Elliot's credentials were pulled yesterday at 4:52. Nobody designated a cleared replacement before today. The rest followed automatically. Our verification software has logged every transaction in real time since the transition. That's a more rigorous record than any single person ever kept. A record isn't a clearance, Anthony said. Software can log a signature. It can't hold one. She turned toward me directly, the first time all morning. You could have flagged this differently, Elliot. Escalated it. Made noise. I filed exactly what protocol required, exactly when it required it, I said. Making noise wasn't part of my job description on the way out any more than it was on the way in. That feels like a technicality dressed up as principle. It's the same principle that's kept Holbrook's certifications clean for 28 years, I said. I didn't design it to be convenient. I designed it to be correct. Convenient would have been telling me any of this existed before yesterday. I mentioned Section 4 to you in April. In your first week, I said. You called it just paperwork now at the time. I have no reason to doubt you remember that conversation as clearly as I do. She didn't dispute it. One of the federal officials on the dropped then restored video feed spoke up. We'll need to know whether any authorizations were entered during the gap window. They were, I said. Under subsection 12, anything signed during an unfiled replacement period doesn't just get held for review. It was never valid in the first place. Every manifest the contractors touched since Monday falls under that. The room went quiet enough that I heard the video feed's faint electronic hiss. Olivia set her pen down, picked it back up, then set it down again without ever having written anything with it. She offered no counterargument. A long stretch of silence followed, unusual enough for her that it registered as its own kind of admission. We'll need a corrective filing within the week, the officer said, addressing Anthony rather than Olivia. And a properly cleared signatory name today, not provisionally. You'll have both by Monday, Anthony said. Elliot's authority restored in full as of this morning's revocation, and every signature from the gap window reviewed line by line. Lavigne finally opened his folder. I can confirm every affected manifest right now, if it helps move the filing faster. It would, the officer said. Nothing at Holbrook had technically broken this week. The protocol had simply executed precisely as written, on a schedule nobody but its authors had ever bothered memorizing. Monday's corrective filing landed with the contracting office on schedule, and Anthony walked the terms over to my truck in person rather than mailing them. Full authority restored, back pay covering the gap, and per subsection 12's own hazard continuity clause, a stipend equal to $5,610,000. You could have fought for more, he said, handing me the folder. The clause doesn't negotiate, I said. That was always the point of it. Board's already asking whether you'd take on an oversight role. Not day-to-day. More of a standing seat. I'll think about it. You've already decided, haven't you? Probably, I admitted. Give me a week to pretend otherwise. He laughed at that, the first real laugh I'd heard out of him since this whole thing started. Olivia's exit from operational modernization happened fast once it happened. By Friday, her nameplate was gone from the executive wing. The space briefly empty before someone else's name went up in its place, and the biometric rollout she'd championed got quietly folded back under security within the month, vendor contracts simply allowed to lapse without renewal. Lavigne mentioned she'd landed a director-level position with a smaller supplier 2 states over. Legitimately earned, not some quiet consolation prize with a nicer title stapled on. Good for her, genuinely. I skipped the industry conference circuit entirely that winter. No interest in manufacturing a closure scene out of a hotel ballroom. What I got instead was quieter. A printed holiday card from someone I used to work alongside, forwarded through a mutual contact, wishing the family well and nothing more. That was enough. It usually is. The mortgage on my son's shop got paid down substantially the same week the stipend cleared, though not entirely. I told him to keep some skin in the game, build his own equity in it properly rather than start clean on someone else's dime. He argued the point for a solid 10 minutes over the phone, citing every reason it made more sense to just clear the whole balance. I won the argument anyway, same as I generally do with him, mostly because I'm right more often than either of us likes to admit. He came by that Sunday with his kids, and we grilled in the driveway until it got dark, no mention of Holbrook the entire afternoon. Back at the plant, the inspection seal went straight into rotation the Monday I returned. No ceremony, no speech. No one making a production out of it. I stamped a cleared shipment before 9 that morning, the exact same weight in my hand it had always carried across 28 years, and Lavine made a point of walking past my office just to nod once through the doorway on his way to the dock. That was plenty. It's usually all it takes. I keep a laminated copy of subsection 12 taped inside the top drawer of my toolbox these days, updated every time the language changes, which isn't often. Call it insurance against the next person who mistakes a signature requirement for sentimentality. Work itself didn't change much, in the end. Same floor, same machine noise, same black coffee no sugar. What changed was smaller and considerably harder to name out loud. Who, from here forward, actually got to decide what counted as paperwork worth reading before signing anything. That wasn't revenge. That was a protocol nobody bothered rewriting, finally getting exactly the Tuesday it had been waiting 28 years to meet.